Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Nightmare Tales. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more haunting stories like this. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. It was September 1987 and I'll never forget the moment Lily and I pulled up to the Ravenwood Hotel. The place had an eerie reputation. People who stayed there either vanished without a trace or left raving about shadows that whispered and doors that knocked back. For me, it was exactly what I was looking for. A real investigation, something that would finally prove the paranormal was more than just ghost stories. For Lily, well, let's just say she wasn't as excited. "This place gives me the creeps," she muttered as she climbed out of the car, her eyes scanning the building's darkened windows. The hotel stood like a blackened tooth in the middle of the forest, the ivy crawling up its sides like veins. The stories hadn't done it justice. It was worse in person. "That's what makes it perfect," I replied, pulling my camera gear out of the trunk. "This is the kind of place where legends are born." Lily didn't seem convinced. She hugged her backpack to her chest, her face pale in the glow of our headlights. "Are you sure about this, Sam? People say no one stays here overnight." "Exactly," I said, slinging my camera bag over my shoulder. "Think of what this could do for us. If we get proof of something here, we'll make a name for ourselves." Her lips tightened, but she followed me anyway. That was one of the things I loved about her. She never let fear stop her, at least not until it had to. The front doors were massive, the kind you'd expect on a Gothic cathedral, and when we pushed them open, they let out this awful groaning sound, like the hotel itself was protesting our arrival. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and every surface was coated in a layer of neglect. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals dulled and covered in cobwebs, while the faded wallpaper peeled away to reveal strange marks carved into the wood underneath. "This doesn't feel right," Lily said softly. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silence it echoed like a scream. "It's just an old building," I said, flipping on my flashlight. "Probably hasn't seen a visitor in decades." She didn't reply, and I couldn't blame her. The place had a weight to it, like the walls were pressing in, watching. But we were here, and I wasn't about to let her second thoughts ruin the night. I started unpacking my camera gear, determined to capture everything. "Let's start in the lobby," I said. "We'll work our way upstairs after that. And remember, don't knock on any doors." That was the rule. Every local we talked to, every article we read, it all boiled down to one warning: don't knock on the doors. It sounded ridiculous at the time, but as I said it out loud, even I felt a little chill crawl up my spine. "Why would knocking matter?" Lily asked, her voice shaky but curious. I shrugged. "Probably just part of the myth. You know how these things go." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. The first hour passed without anything too dramatic. We filmed the decayed furniture, the strange carvings in the walls, and the way the light from our flashlights barely seemed to reach the corners of the room. The air was cold, colder than it should have been, and every now and then a creak or a shuffle made us both jump. But then it happened. We were about to head upstairs when I heard it. A knock. 3 deliberate taps, faint but unmistakable. They came from the hallway to our left, where the shadows were darker, thicker. "Did you hear that?" I asked, freezing in place. Lily's eyes were wide. "Hear what?" I pointed toward the hallway. "That knocking, like this." I rapped my knuckles against the wooden banister for emphasis. Her face went pale. "No, Sam, I didn't hear anything. Are you sure?" I nodded. "Positive. It came from over there." "Let's just stick to the stairs," she said quickly, her voice firm but trembling. I wanted to check it out, but the look in her eyes stopped me. "All right," I said. "We'll stick to the plan." We climbed the stairs together, the wood groaning beneath our feet. Each step felt heavier than the last, the silence around us growing thicker. By the time we reached the second floor, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, though I wasn't sure why. That's when we saw it, a door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar. "Room 213, Lily whispered. Her voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear her. "Should we take a look?" I asked, though I already knew what her answer would be. No," she said, but then after a pause she added, "Just be careful." The air felt different as we approached the door, colder, heavier. A faint sickly smell wafted out, like something had been rotting inside. My flashlight flickered as I reached out to push the door open, but before I could touch it, a sound froze me in place. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the other side of the door, slow, deliberate, and all too real. The sound of those knocks still lingers in my head. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I didn't know what to do, whether to run or to stand my ground. Lily grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. "Sam, let's go," she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, backing away from the door. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like the sound might echo through the hall. The air around us felt heavier with every step, as though the hotel didn't want us to leave the second floor. Still, we descended the stairs, neither of us saying a word until we were back in the lobby. Once there, the oppressive silence wasn't any better. I tried to distract myself by fiddling with my camera. The footage I'd taken so far wasn't much. A few shots of the decrepit walls, the broken furniture, but it didn't matter. Something had shifted. I could feel it. The hotel wasn't just a decayed old building anymore. It felt alive, like it was breathing with us. "I don't think we should stay," Lily said, suddenly breaking the silence. I shook my head. "We've come all this way. We can't leave now." "Did you hear what I heard up there? The knocking? You said it yourself. No one's supposed to knock on the doors." Her voice rose, but she caught herself, glancing around as if someone or something might be listening. "I know," I said, trying to sound calm, even though my nerves were shot. "But that's exactly why we need to stay. Whatever's happening here, we need to document it." Lily sighed, pacing near the entrance. "Fine, but if something else happens, we're leaving. I mean it, Sam." "Deal," I said, though I wasn't sure I meant it. To make her feel better, I suggested we stick to the ground floor for the night. We set up our gear in the lobby, but the chandelier loomed like some forgotten sentinel above us. I couldn't shake the feeling that it might crash down at any moment, but I didn't say anything to Lily. She was already on edge. We decided to take turns keeping watch. I offered to go first, partly because I was too wired to sleep anyway. Lily wrapped herself in her jacket and curled up on the dusty couch, her back to me. I tried to focus on the camera feed, but my mind kept drifting back to the knocks. Who, or what, had made that sound, and why? The hours dragged. The old grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, its hands moving slower than they should have. I started to wonder if time worked differently here, if this place existed outside the normal rules of the world. My eyes burned from staring at the camera screen, and I finally looked away, letting them adjust to the dim light of the room. That's when I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it wasn't coming from upstairs. It was closer, much closer. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The sound came from one of the doors leading to the dining room, just beyond the lobby. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it toward the source. The door was shut tight, and the beam of light revealed nothing unusual. "Sam?" Lily's voice was groggy, muffled by the sleeve of her jacket. She must have heard the sound, too. "It's fine," I lied, standing up. "Probably just the wind." She sat up, her eyes wide with fear. That wasn't the wind. I knew she was right. The knock was deliberate, just like before. Someone or something was trying to get our attention. Against my better judgment, I approached the door. "Stay here," I told Lily, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to protect her or myself. My flashlight trembled as I reached for the handle. The metal was ice cold under my fingers. I hesitated, half expecting the knocks to start again. They didn't. I turned the knob slowly and pushed the door open. The dining room was empty, or at least it looked empty. Dust coated every surface and the air smelled faintly of mildew. Broken chairs were scattered around the room, and a long table sat in the center, its once elegant cloth now a tattered ruin, but there was no sign of anyone, or anything that could have made the sound. "Sam, come back," Lily called from the lobby. "I'm just checking," I said, stepping further inside. My flashlight swept across the room, landing on a sideboard against the far wall. That's when I saw it, a handprint. It was smeared across the dusty surface, fresh and too large to be human. I backed out of the room, my pulse racing. "We need to leave," I said the moment I reached Lily. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice shaking. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just grabbed my bag and headed for the door. But as I reached for the handle, the chandelier above us began to sway, its crystals clinking softly against each other. The movement grew more violent and the sound filled the room like a warning. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Neither of us moved. We didn't need to say it. We both knew we weren't alone in that hotel anymore.
We should have left that night. Every part of me wanted to run, but something about the hotel held us there, like invisible strings pulling us deeper into its clutches. The moment we stepped away from the front door, I knew we were making a mistake. Lily didn't argue this time. She just followed me, her eyes darting to every shadow as we headed back to the center of the lobby. "What's the plan, Sam?" she asked, her voice barely audible. She clutched her backpack like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I didn't have an answer. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen in the dining room. the handprint that couldn't possibly belong to a person. "We'll stay in the lobby," I said finally. "Just for a few more hours. We'll document whatever we can and leave at first light." Lily nodded, though I could tell she didn't believe we'd make it till morning. We set up our sleeping bags in the corner of the lobby, near one of the large windows. The moonlight streaming in gave us a faint sense of security, as if the light could keep the darkness at bay. But even as I arranged my camera to point toward the staircase, I felt like something was watching us. Lily curled up in her sleeping bag, her back to me. "Wake me if anything happens," she mumbled, though I doubted she'd be able to sleep. I stayed awake, my flashlight and camera ready. The hours dragged on, each tick of the grandfather clock like a hammer against my nerves. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of shadow that vanished the moment I turned my head. Around 3 a.m., the air in the room changed. It became colder, heavier, as though the hotel itself was holding its breath. The flashlight in my hand began to flicker, the beam of light struggling against the darkness. I glanced at the staircase, half expecting to see someone, or something, descending. Then I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it came from the hallway to the right of the lobby. My stomach tightened as I turned my head, the beam of my flashlight trembling along with my hands. The hallway stretched into darkness, the shadows thick and impenetrable. The knocking sounded again, louder this time, as though whatever was making it was growing impatient. I thought about waking Lily, but I didn't want to scare her. Instead, I stood and took a cautious step toward the hallway. My footsteps echoed in the silence, each one louder than the last. "Hello?" My voice cracked, and I immediately regretted speaking. The sound of it felt intrusive, like I was breaking some unspoken rule. No response. I moved closer, my flashlight illuminating the faded wallpaper and cracked floorboards. The knocking had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Just as I was about to turn back, I saw it, something in the shadows at the end of the hall. It wasn't a person. It was too tall, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. My flashlight barely touched it before the beam flickered and died completely, plunging me into darkness. My breath caught, and I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. "Sam?" Lily's voice cut through the silence, startling me. She was standing at the edge of the hallway, her face pale in the dim light from the lobby. "What are you doing?" "There's something," I stammered, pointing toward the end of the hall, but when I turned back, the figure was gone. Lily grabbed my arm. "We're not staying here another second." I didn't argue. Together, we hurried back to our makeshift camp, throwing our things into our bags as quickly as we could. The grandfather clock struck 3, the chime echoing through the lobby like a death knell. I tried to ignore the feeling that we were being watched, but it was impossible. As we made our way toward the front door, the sound started again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was coming from the main staircase. Slowly, deliberately, the sound descended, step by step, closer and closer. "Go!" I shouted, shoving Lily toward the door. She fumbled with the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, as though the hotel itself was trying to keep us inside. "Sam, help me!" she cried, her voice rising in panic. I rushed to her side, throwing my weight against the door. It groaned under the pressure, but didn't open. Behind us, the knocking continued, each sound like a heartbeat growing louder and louder. Then it stopped. The silence was worse than the knocking. I turned, my flashlight trembling in my hand, and saw the shadow again, standing at the base of the stairs, its head tilted as if it were studying us. "Don't look," Lily whispered, her hands trembling as she clutched the door handle. "Just keep trying." But I couldn't look away. The figure took a step forward, its movement slow and deliberate. I could see it more clearly now, its long, spindly limbs and the unnatural way it moved, like a puppet with its strings tangled. Finally, the door gave way, and Lily and I tumbled outside into the freezing night air. The moment we crossed the threshold, the oppressive weight lifted, and the silence was replaced by the sounds of the forest. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. But as I started the engine and glanced back at the hotel, I saw it. The figure was standing in the window of room 213, watching us leave. Leaving was supposed to be the end of it, but it wasn't. The image of that figure in the window of room 213 haunted me for days after we escaped. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew better. And when Lily found something strange in the footage we'd recorded, it only confirmed my fears. In the shaky video from the second floor, just before the knocks began, a figure was visible at the edge of the frame. It was blurred, almost impossible to make out, but it was there. Standing in the doorway of room 213. "We need to go back," I told Lily after we'd watched the footage for the third time. She looked at me like I was insane. "Go back? Are you out of your mind? We barely made it out alive." "That's exactly why we need to go back. This could be proof, Lily. Actual, undeniable proof. We need to document it properly." "No," she said firmly, crossing her arms. "I'm not risking my life for your obsession, Sam. That place is cursed." But I couldn't let it go. The questions burned in my mind. What was in room 213? Why was it the focus of everything that happened that night? I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I had answers, so I went back, alone. The hotel was even more foreboding the second time. The air was heavier, the silence deeper. As I stepped inside, it felt like the building recognized me, like it was welcoming me back into its twisted embrace. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness as I made my way up the stairs, each creak of the wood echoing in the stillness. Room 213 was exactly as I'd left it, its door slightly ajar, the faint smell of decay wafting out. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave and never look back, but I couldn't. I had to know. I pushed the door open. The room was small and unremarkable. A bed with rotted sheets, a broken chair, a cracked mirror on the wall. But the air inside was suffocating, like the walls were closing in. I swept my flashlight across the room, and that's when I saw it. The carvings. They covered the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. Symbols and markings I couldn't begin to understand. They seemed to pulse in the light, as if alive. And in the center of the room, scratched into the floorboards, was a single word: knock. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into complete darkness. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was deafening, echoing from all around me. I fumbled for the flashlight, my hand shaking, and when I managed to turn it back on, the beam landed on the mirror. The reflection wasn't mine. It was the figure, its hollow eyes staring back at me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure in the mirror wasn't just a reflection. It was alive. Its empty eyes stared into mine, its head tilting in that same unnatural way I'd seen before. My flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam flickering as though the light itself couldn't bear to illuminate the thing before me. Then it moved. The figure stepped closer, not in the mirror, but in the room. I turned, my flashlight casting a weak, shaking glow over the empty space. But I could feel it. It was there, standing just beyond the edge of the light, waiting. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice cracking. There was no response, just the oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of my own heartbeat. Then, the knocking began again. 3 deliberate raps, this time from the walls themselves, surrounding me. Knock, knock, knock. The carvings on the walls seemed to pulse, glowing faintly as the sound grew louder. The symbols felt alive, writhing as though they were trying to escape the very surface they were etched into. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the broken chair. The flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor, and for a moment, the room was plunged into darkness again. When I scrambled to pick it up, I felt something brush against my arm, cold, skeletal, and impossibly strong. I yanked my arm away, the flashlight flickering back to life as I swung it wildly in every direction. But the room was empty, or so it seemed. The carvings on the floor now held my attention. The single word etched there, knock, seemed deeper, as if freshly carved. Against my better judgment, I knelt down to examine it. My fingers hesitated, hovering just above the grooves, when the knocking suddenly stopped.
And a voice whispered, "Why did you come back?" The sound was everywhere, reverberating through the room. It wasn't human. It was guttural, ancient, and filled with malice. My stomach turned as the air grew colder, and the smell of decay became overwhelming. I just want to understand," I stammered, my voice barely audible. "You were warned," the voice hissed, "but you knocked anyway." "I didn't," I started to say, but then the memory hit me like a punch to the gut. The first night, the staircase. I'd knocked to mimic the sound I'd heard. 3 times. Without even realizing it, I'd broken the rule. And now it was too late. The air shifted, and the shadows began to move. They twisted and stretched, forming shapes that weren't entirely human. Figures emerged from the darkness, their hollow eyes glowing faintly. They surrounded me, their movements slow and deliberate, like predators savoring the hunt. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. "Stay back," I shouted, though I knew it was useless. The figures didn't respond. They closed in, their faces blank, their bodies distorted as though they didn't quite fit the space they occupied. My back hit the wall, and the cold wood sent a shiver down my spine. The carvings pulsed around me, their light growing brighter, almost blinding. Then, in the corner of my vision, I saw it. The door to room 213. It was open again, but instead of leading to the hallway, it revealed something else entirely. Beyond the threshold was a void, a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly. The figures stopped, their heads turning in unison toward the door. "Enter," the voice commanded. I shook my head, panic surging through me. "Number I won't." The shadows pressed closer, their hollow eyes locking onto mine. "Enter, or remain." The air was thick with their presence, and I could feel my sanity slipping. I didn't have a choice. With trembling legs, I moved toward the door, the darkness within it calling to me like a siren. As I crossed the threshold, the world around me shifted. The last thing I heard was Lily's voice, faint and distant, calling my name, and then everything went black. The first thing I noticed when I woke was the silence, a deep, unnatural quiet that made my ears ache. I was lying on the cold, hard ground in a forest clearing, surrounded by the faint light of dawn breaking through the trees. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me like a stone. For a moment, I thought it was over, that I had somehow escaped, but then I looked down at my arms. Faint scars ran across my skin, forming symbols I didn't recognize. They were faded, but the pain was fresh, like they'd been burned into me moments before. My breath hitched and I scrambled to my feet. The Ravenwood Hotel loomed in the distance, its windows dark and lifeless. The building looked like it had been abandoned for centuries, as if it had aged overnight. The sight of it sent a shiver through me, but something else caught my attention, something worse. The knocking. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the direction of the hotel, a low, deliberate rhythm that seemed to follow me as I stumbled through the woods. I couldn't escape it. The sound burrowed into my mind, a constant reminder that I wasn't truly free. When I finally made it to the road, I saw headlights in the distance. Lily, she must have waited for me. As the car came closer, I waved frantically, desperate for any sense of normalcy. When she stopped and ran toward me, I could see the fear etched into her face. "Sam," she shouted, throwing her arms around me. "What happened? Where were you?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's real anymore." She pulled back, her hands gripping my shoulders. "I thought you were gone. I thought the hotel had taken you." "It tried," I said, my voice trembling, "but I got out." She hesitated, studying me. "What do you mean it tried? What did you see?" I couldn't explain it, not in a way that would make sense. The void, the shadows, the figures with hollow eyes. It all sounded insane. And yet I knew it was real. I could still feel the weight of their presence, the cold of their touch. "Let's just leave," I said, avoiding her gaze. "Please." Lily didn't argue. She helped me into the car, and we drove in silence. The road twisted and turned, taking us further away from the hotel, but the weight in my chest didn't ease. Something still felt wrong. As the forest thinned and the sun rose higher, I let myself believe we were safe. But then, in the rearview mirror, I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, its hollow eyes locked on me. It didn't move, didn't follow, but its presence was enough to send a fresh wave of terror through me. "Don't look back," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Just keep driving." Lily didn't ask questions. She pressed the accelerator, and we sped down the winding road, leaving the figure and the Ravenwood Hotel behind. Weeks passed, but the nightmares didn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that room. The carvings glowed, the shadows moved, and the knocking never stopped. I tried to return to normal life, but it was impossible. The scars on my arms were a constant reminder of what had happened, of what I had brought back with me, because I knew deep down that I hadn't escaped. Not really. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I heard it again, the sound I'd been dreading. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the front door, slow, deliberate. My heart raced as I approached, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I didn't. I couldn't. With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob and pulled it open. There was no one there. But on the floor, just beyond the threshold, was a small folded piece of paper. I picked it up, my hands shaking, and unfolded it. 4 words were scrawled across the page in jagged, uneven handwriting. You knocked. We answered. The knocking started again, this time from inside the apartment. Knock, knock, knock. And that's when I realized there's no escape. The Ravenwood Hotel wasn't just a place. It was a presence, a force that lingers, waiting. And once you've let it in, it never truly lets you go. Next story. Don't Knock. The Curse of the Haunted Hotel. The first thing I noticed about the hotel was its silence. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was heavy, oppressive, like the building was holding its breath. The receptionist, a wiry man with sunken eyes, handed me the key with trembling hands. Room 307, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. Don't knock on the door across the hall. Room 308, it's empty. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Why would I knock? His warning felt unnecessary, but it left an itch in my brain, a seed of curiosity. The elevator groaned as it carried me to the 3rd floor. I stepped out into a dimly lit corridor that smelled faintly of mildew. The wallpaper peeled at the edges and the carpet squished underfoot as if soaked. Room 307 was at the end of the hallway, and across from it, as promised, was room 308. The door was plain, unremarkable except for the brass numbers, tarnished and dull. I unlocked my room and stepped inside. It was as worn as the rest of the hotel, but functional. A single bed, a small table, and a rickety chair. A window overlooked the parking lot where rain drizzled under the flickering street lights. It was just another cheap hotel on a road trip I had barely planned. But that door, room 308, it gnawed at me. As night fell, the building's silence deepened, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every creak, every shuffle. I tried to distract myself with my laptop, but the Wi-Fi was abysmal. With nothing to do, my mind wandered back to the receptionist's words. Don't knock. At first, I laughed it off. Maybe it was a joke, a local legend meant to spook travelers, or maybe it was some private room they didn't want disturbed. But then I heard it, a faint tapping. It came from room 308. My breath hitched. Was someone inside? The receptionist had said the room was empty. I leaned against my door, straining to hear. The tapping came again, rhythmic and deliberate. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a loose pipe or some mechanical issue, but the sound was too distinct, too human. Curiosity clawed at me. Before I knew it, I was in the hallway staring at the door. Hello? My voice echoed down the empty corridor. No response, just the faint tapping. My hand hovered over the door, fingers trembling. A whisper of a thought crossed my mind. What if I knocked back? A chill ran down my spine. My heart raced as I raised my fist, but before I could knock, the tapping stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me, but sleep didn't come. The tapping haunted me, repeating in my head like a broken record. Who or what was on the other side of that door? I didn't know it then, but my life had already changed. Whatever I had heard that night was just the beginning, and I had ignored the most important warning of all, don't knock. Sleep was a lost cause. My heart thudded as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound that might confirm or deny what I had heard. The hotel's oppressive silence enveloped me again, and my thoughts began to spiral. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. A faint shuffle outside my door. It wasn't the tapping this time, it was heavier, like someone pacing. My pulse quickened as I sat up, straining to hear. Was it another guest, a staff member, or something worse? Curiosity, the same gnawing feeling that had led me to room 308 earlier, took over again. Against every shred of logic, I crept toward my door and pressed my ear against it. The pacing stopped. Hello? My voice barely rose above a whisper, but it felt thunderous in the stillness. A moment of silence passed. Then a faint, almost inaudible voice drifted through the door. It wasn't speaking, it was humming. The melody was haunting, like a lullaby sung off-key. It sent shivers racing down my spine. I froze. My breath hitched as I backed away from the door. The humming stopped abruptly, and for a moment I thought I had imagined it. But then 3 soft knocks came. They weren't on my door. They were on room 308. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to believe it was just another guest, someone playing a prank. But my gut told me otherwise. The hallway outside was empty when I checked in, and the receptionist had been adamant. The room was vacant. I peeked through the peephole. The corridor was dim, the flickering overhead light casting unsettling shadows. No one was there. Yet the knocks continued, steady and deliberate. Then it happened. The door to room 308 creaked open just a sliver. A shadow moved inside, barely visible through the gap. It wasn't a person. It was something shapeless, dark and unnatural, shifting as though alive. I stumbled back from the peephole, heart pounding. What had I just seen? My mind scrambled for answers, but none made sense. The rational part of me screamed to call the front desk, to leave the hotel altogether. But another part of me, the same reckless curiosity that had brought me to the door earlier, wanted to know more. A faint whisper slid through the crack under my door. It wasn't English, but I understood it as clearly as if it had been spoken in my own voice. "Come closer." "No," I muttered, shaking my head. My hands trembled as I fumbled with my phone, but there was no signal. The Wi-Fi was still dead. I was completely cut off. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Come closer." I backed into the corner of the room, clutching the phone like a lifeline. My chest tightened, and every instinct screamed at me to run, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, trapped in my room with only one terrible thought echoing in my mind. What happens if I don't obey? I don't remember deciding to move. It felt as if something else had taken control, pulling me toward the door like a puppet on strings. My legs trembled, my breath shallow, but I couldn't stop. The whispers under the door grew louder, clearer, as though they were alive and pulling me in. "Come closer," they repeated, this time more insistent. Their tone wasn't threatening, it was coaxing, almost soothing. But the unnatural weight in their cadence made my stomach churn. I reached the door and froze, my hand hovering above the knob. My pulse thundered in my ears, and for a moment I considered turning back, locking myself in, waiting for sunrise and bolting from this cursed place. But as if sensing my hesitation, the door to room 308 creaked open wider. This time I could see more, a faint pulsing red light emanating from the room's interior. It spilled out into the hallway like blood, illuminating the peeling wallpaper and casting jagged shadows. And then I heard it again. That haunting hum from earlier, now louder and clearer. It wasn't a person humming, it was something else entirely, something that didn't belong. "What am I doing?" I whispered to myself. My voice sounded foreign, hollow, as if the hotel had swallowed it. Yet I couldn't pull away. A force, unseen but unrelenting, pressed against me, urging me forward. I tightened my grip on the doorknob, hesitating just a second longer. "No," I muttered under my breath. "This is insane." But then the knob twisted in my hand, not by my doing. I yelped and stumbled back as the door to room 307 flung itself open. The hallway yawned before me, empty except for the gaping maw of room 308. The air grew colder, biting at my skin, and the faint smell of decay wafted in. "Closer," the whispers repeated. This time they were everywhere, surrounding me, seeping into my thoughts. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop them. "You can stop this," I thought. "Just leave. Walk away." But where would I go? My car was in the lot, sure, but the storm outside had worsened. The roads would be treacherous, and the nearest town was miles away. Besides, some part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, needed to see what was inside room 308. I took a step into the hallway. The door to room 308 groaned wider, as if welcoming me. My eyes strained against the pulsing red light, trying to make sense of the shapes shifting within. They were amorphous, like shadows cast by nothing. I reached the threshold and peered inside. The room was empty, barren. No furniture, no bed, no fixtures. Just a bare wooden floor splintered with age and walls marred by deep, jagged scratches. But at the center of the room, etched into the floorboards, was a symbol. A circle surrounded by runes I didn't recognize. It glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. And then I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't human. It was taller, its form stretched and distorted, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. Its face, or what I thought was its face, was featureless, a void that seemed to suck the light out of the room. Yet I felt its gaze, heavy and piercing. "Why?" I croaked, my voice barely audible. It tilted its head as if studying me. And then, in a voice that wasn't a whisper but a deafening roar inside my mind, it said, "You shouldn't have come." I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to stay upright. The figure didn't move closer. It didn't need to. Its mere presence filled the air with a suffocating weight, pressing down on me like a tidal wave. "What do you want?" I managed to whisper, though my voice cracked. The figure tilted its head again, its movements unnervingly slow and deliberate. The glowing runes on the floor pulsed brighter, casting distorted shadows that seemed to reach for me. Then, without warning, the figure spoke, not aloud but directly into my mind. "You knocked." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My knees buckled and I fell to the floor. "No, I didn't," I protested, my voice shaking. "I didn't knock." The figure's void-like face seemed to distort, a ripple of something dark and malevolent passing through it. The whispering voices that had filled the air earlier grew louder, more insistent until they were a deafening cacophony. "You opened the door," the voice continued, relentless. "You let us in." "I didn't." I froze, the memory of earlier flooding back. I hadn't knocked, but I had stood outside room 308. I had spoken. I had listened. And worst of all, I had let my curiosity lead me here. The figure raised an elongated arm, its fingers impossibly long and sharp. It pointed to the glowing runes on the floor, and as I followed its gesture, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. My own shadow, elongated and distorted, was cast onto the floor within the circle. My heart sank. What is this?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, cold and devoid of emotion. "A pact. Your curiosity has bound you." "No," I said, shaking my head violently. "I didn't agree to anything." The figure's faceless void seemed to ripple again, as though it was amused. "Your will brought you here. Your defiance means nothing." The pulsing light from the runes intensified, casting the room in an eerie, blood-red glow. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and writhing as if alive. My chest tightened, panic surging through me. I needed to leave, but my body wouldn't respond. My legs refused to move, and my eyes remained locked on the figure. "Please," I begged, my voice breaking. "I didn't mean to. Just let me go." The figure stepped closer, and the room seemed to close in around me. The walls felt like they were pressing inward, the air growing thinner. It loomed over me, its presence suffocating. "There is no escape," it said. "Once you knock, you are ours." Tears streamed down my face as I clawed at the floor, desperate to break free of whatever force held me captive. The figure raised its arm again, and this time the shadows surged forward, encircling me like living chains. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips. The whispers returned, louder than ever, until they drowned out everything else. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought it was over, that this was the end. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light vanished. The whispers ceased, and the room was empty. I was back in my own room, sprawled on the floor. The clock on the nightstand read 3:03 a.m. The air was still, the oppressive silence of the hotel returning like a heavy blanket. For a moment I thought it had all been a dream, a nightmare conjured by my overactive imagination. But when I looked at my hands, I saw the faint red glow of the runes etched into my palms, and I knew it wasn't over. Morning came reluctantly, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the thin hotel curtains. The storm had passed, leaving a misty haze over the parking lot below, yet the weight in my chest hadn't lifted. The faint red runes on my palms still glimmered, a constant reminder of the horrors I had witnessed. I had to leave. Now I shoved my belongings into my bag with shaking hands, avoiding even a glance at the door to room 308 as I stepped into the hallway. The air was stale, thick with an unnatural stillness. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet sent my heart racing. As I descended the stairs to the lobby, I noticed something odd. The hotel felt empty. The faint sound of chatter or movement, anything that might suggest other guests, was absent. Even the receptionist was gone. The front desk sat unmanned, and the only sound was the faint hum of the flickering light above. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally. No response. I approached the desk, searching for a bell or something to get attention, but my eyes were drawn to a small notebook lying open on the counter. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with handwritten notes and a hurried scrawl. The last entry caught my attention. "Room 308 must remain sealed. Do not knock. Do not enter. They are waiting." My stomach churned. The receptionist's warning replayed in my mind. "Don't knock on the door across the hall." I slammed the book shut, the sound echoing through the empty lobby. The notebook's cover bore a faded logo of the hotel, along with the year 1958. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a warning, it was history. The door to the back office creaked open. My heart stopped. A figure emerged, Not the shadowy form from last night, but the receptionist. His face was pale, his sunken eyes darting nervously as he shuffled forward. "You shouldn't have stayed," he said, his voice barely audible. I took a step back. "What's happening here? What's in room 308? His hands trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small battered photograph. He handed it to me without a word. The picture showed a group of people standing in front of what looked like the hotel, but much older, worn and weathered. At the center of the group was a man, his eyes dark and hollow, his smile unnatural. "That's him," the receptionist said, his voice quivering. "The one who built this place, the one who made the deal." "Deal?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, glancing nervously toward the hallway leading to room 308. This hotel was his creation, a trap, a gateway to something beyond. Room 308 was the centerpiece, a doorway to whatever they are. He vanished years ago, but his bargain remains. I looked at the photograph again. The man's eyes seemed to pierce through the image, staring directly at me. A chill ran down my spine. "Why didn't you stop me?" I demanded, my voice rising. "You knew what was in that room." His expression darkened. "I tried, but once you've heard them, it's too late. They latch onto you, feed off your curiosity. The more you resist, the stronger they pull." I glanced at my palms, the faint glow of the runes now pulsing faintly. "What does this mean?" I asked, holding my hands up. His face fell, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "It means they've marked you. You're part of the pack now." My legs felt like they would give out. I staggered back, gripping the edge of the counter for support. "How do I break it?" "You don't," he said, his tone devoid of hope. "The only thing you can do is run, and even then they'll find you. They always do." I couldn't breathe. The walls of the lobby seemed to close in, the air growing colder with every passing second. I turned to leave, but his final words froze me in place. "Whatever you do, don't look back." The receptionist's words echoed in my mind as I stumbled out of the hotel lobby. The misty morning air felt suffocating, the weight of unseen eyes pressing on my back. My car was just ahead, parked beneath a flickering streetlight. The run seemed endless, but I dared not look back. I threw my bag into the passenger seat, fumbling with the keys. My hands trembled so violently that it took 3 tries before I could start the engine. The car roared to life, and I pulled out of the parking lot, the tires skidding on the slick asphalt. The road stretched out before me, a waning path disappearing into the fog. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get as far from the hotel as possible. But no matter how far I drove, the dread followed me. The faint whispers still lingered in my ears, like an echo of something I couldn't escape. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, but its warmth never reached me. The runes on my palms had stopped glowing, but the faint markings were still there, etched into my skin like scars. I tried to convince myself it was over, that I had escaped whatever nightmare the hotel had trapped me in, but deep down, I knew better. The first sign that I hadn't left it behind came as I reached the next town. A small diner sat at the edge of the road, its neon sign blinking erratically. My stomach churned with hunger, and I decided to stop. I needed a moment to breathe, to collect myself, maybe even to find someone who could explain what had happened. The diner was nearly empty. A lone waitress stood behind the counter, her back to me as she filled a coffee pot. The faint jingle of the bell above the door barely registered as I stepped inside. I took a seat at the counter, my eyes darting nervously around the room. Everything seemed normal, too normal. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant sound of a radio playing an old tune, it all felt like a fragile facade, ready to crack at any moment. "What can I get you?" the waitress asked, her voice startling me. I blinked up at her, my throat dry. "Just coffee," I managed to say. She nodded and poured a steaming cup, sliding it toward me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a weak laugh, but before I could respond, the whispers returned. Faint at first, barely audible, but they grew louder, more insistent. My head snapped toward the source, the far corner of the diner, where a door I hadn't noticed before stood slightly ajar. Next story, The Forbidden Doll, a family's cursed legacy. The doll arrived on a rainy afternoon, tucked away in a dusty wooden box, wrapped with frayed twine. I didn't know it then, but that day would mark the beginning of my family's unraveling. My grandmother had passed just a week prior, and as the oldest in the family, I inherited her belongings. Among the jewelry, photo albums, and trinkets, the doll stood out, its porcelain face cracked in places, its eyes unnervingly lifelike. I hadn't asked for it. In fact, I hadn't even known it existed until it was unearthed from the depths of her attic. My mother, who was helping me sort through the inheritance, froze when she saw it. "Don't touch it," she said, her voice sharp. Her reaction startled me. "It's just a doll," I replied, brushing off her concern. Probably some antique she kept for sentimental value. But her expression didn't soften. "It's not just a doll," she muttered, almost to herself. "It's her doll." I didn't understand what she meant, but the way her eyes lingered on it, wide with fear, made my skin crawl. My mother wasn't one for superstition, yet something about this doll unnerved her. She refused to even touch the box, leaving it for me to handle. That night, I placed the doll in the corner of my living room, still nestled in its wooden box. I couldn't deny it was creepy. Its dress, once white and laced with intricate embroidery, had yellowed with age. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow me no matter where I moved. I told myself it was just my imagination, but even then, I didn't feel alone in the room. As the hours passed, the rain outside intensified. I buried myself in work, trying to ignore the unease the doll brought. Around midnight, a strange noise pulled me from my focus. It was faint. A soft shuffling sound, almost like fabric brushing against the floor. My heart skipped a beat. I turned toward the box. The doll was exactly where I'd left it, its head tilted slightly to the side. I tried to shake off the creeping paranoia. The house was old. Creaks and groans were normal during storms, but then it happened again. This time the sound was louder, clearer, as if it came from right behind me. My breath hitched and I spun around, my eyes scanning the empty room. "Hello?" I called out, feeling ridiculous even as I said it. No answer, just the steady drumming of rain against the windows. I approached the doll cautiously, with the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Something was different. Its head, I realized, wasn't tilted when I had first placed it in the box. Had I moved it without realizing, or had someone else? I told myself I was overreacting, that exhaustion was playing tricks on my mind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I reached to close the box, a soft childlike whisper drifted through the room. "Why did you leave me?" My blood ran cold. The voice was faint, almost indistinguishable from the sound of the rain, but I heard it. I was sure of it. I froze, my hand hovering over the box. The doll stared back at me, its glassy eyes filled with something I couldn't quite describe, something that wasn't there before. Fear. Sleep was impossible. The whisper echoed in my mind, haunting every corner of my thoughts. The doll's presence weighed on me, its lifelike eyes seared into my memory. I told myself it was stress, that grief over my grandmother's death was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. By morning, I had made up my mind. The doll had to go. I called my mother to ask if she wanted it, thinking she might feel some attachment to what could be a family heirloom. Her reaction was immediate and chilling. "Get rid of it," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't care how. Burn it, bury it, throw it in the river. Just don't let it stay in your house." Her fear only made me more curious. "Why? What's the story behind it?" She hesitated, her breath shaky on the other end of the line. "It belonged to your great-grandmother," she finally said. "She used to talk to it, said it was her only friend after the accident." "What accident?" I pressed, my curiosity battling with the unease creeping up my spine. "She lost her son, my uncle. He was just a boy when he drowned in the lake behind their house. After that, she wasn't the same. She started hearing him, said he spoke to her through the doll. Everyone thought she was losing her mind." A chill ran through me. "And the whispering?" My mother's voice dropped to a whisper. "She swore it wasn't her son. She said something else was pretending to be him." The air around me felt colder as her words settled in. The doll was no heirloom. It was a relic of grief and madness, a reminder of a tragedy that had left its mark on my family. I stared at the box in the corner, now wrapped in a blanket in a weak attempt to contain whatever unease it exuded. That evening, I decided to do some research. If the doll truly had such a dark history, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I sifted through my grandmother's belongings, searching for any clues. In a leather-bound journal, brittle with age, I found an entry that made my blood run cold. March 15th, 1928. It watches me. It knows my thoughts. I thought I could contain it, but it feeds on my sorrow. It whispers lies, promises I can't ignore. I fear it won't let me go. The date sent a jolt through me. My great-grandmother had written this entry just months before her death, which had been ruled a suicide. The journal offered no explanation, only more fragmented thoughts about the doll, its whispers, its movements, its demands. I slammed the journal shut, the faint scent of mildew rising as dust motes floated through the air. My heart raced as I glanced toward the box. The blanket covering it had slipped slightly, exposing one glassy eye. It seemed to glint in the dim light, almost as if mocking me. The storm returned that night, the rain hammering against the windows as the wind howled. The doll remained in its box, but the whispers came again, faint and insistent, weaving through the sound of the storm. "Why did you leave me?" the voice asked, softer this time. I buried my head under the covers, trying to drown it out, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more desperate. "Don't abandon me." I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stay in that house, but I was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer weight of my fear. The rain lashed against the windows, and for a moment I swore I saw a shadow outside, a small childlike figure staring in. And then the whispers turned into laughter. By morning, I felt like a shell of myself. My hands trembled as I poured coffee, spilling more than I managed to drink. The laughter from the night before had been no dream. It had followed me into my waking hours, replaying over and over in my mind. That childlike giggle, distorted and echoing, had rooted itself deep within me. I needed answers. Against my better judgment, I decided to call an old friend, Leah. She was a historian with a fascination for folklore and the occult. If anyone could help me make sense of this nightmare, it was her. When I explained the situation, her curiosity was immediate, though tinged with caution. "A cursed doll?" she said, her tone a mix of skepticism and intrigue. "Sounds like something out of an old horror movie, but if it's connected to your family, there might be something to it. Can you bring it over?" The idea of traveling with the doll made my stomach churn, but the thought of being alone with it for another night was worse. I agreed, carefully wrapping it in a thick blanket before placing it in the trunk of my car. It felt like I was transporting a live grenade. The drive to Leah's was uneventful, but the doll's presence lingered. Even sealed in the trunk, it felt as if its eyes were boring into the back of my skull. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of my vision, though every time I turned my head, there was nothing there. When I arrived, Leah greeted me with her usual energy, though her expression darkened when she saw the box. "Let's get this inside," she said, her tone more serious than I'd ever heard it. We set the box on her coffee table, and Leah immediately began examining it. She didn't touch the doll directly, using gloves to handle it instead. "The craftsmanship is incredible," she muttered, tracing the intricate lace of its dress. "But these cracks on the face, they look like they've been there for decades." As she turned the doll over, something fell from its dress, a small piece of paper, yellowed with age. Leah picked it up, her brow furrowing as she read, "Do not separate us, do not abandon me, together forever." "Chilling," she said, handing me the note. "Who do you think wrote this?" I shook my head. "It must have been my great-grandmother. She lost her son and became obsessed with the doll. My mom said she thought it was him speaking to her." Leah's eyes narrowed. "That's classic attachment folklore. Grief can manifest in strange ways, especially when paired with an object that serves as a focus. But this," she gestured to the doll, "this feels different." She flipped through a thick, leather-bound book she'd pulled from her shelves. The pages were filled with notes and sketches of various artifacts and rituals. Finally, she stopped at a page marked with a crude drawing of a doll. "This," she said, pointing to the page, "is a vessel. Some believe objects like this can act as anchors for spirits, or worse, for something pretending to be a spirit." My blood ran cold. "Pretending?" Leah nodded grimly. "Entities like this prey on grief, on vulnerability. They use it to worm their way in. They start with whispers, small movements, things that seem harmless. But once they've attached themselves, it's nearly impossible to break the connection." The whispers didn't stop, even in Leah's house. They weren't loud, but they were persistent, like an incessant murmur just at the edge of my hearing. Leah's expression grew more concerned as the hours passed, and by morning, her once calm demeanor had shifted to unease. "We need to dig deeper," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "This isn't just folklore. Whatever this is, it's attached to you." The words sent a jolt of fear through me. "What do you mean attached?" Leah paced the room, avoiding the doll, which still sat motionless on her coffee table. "These things, they thrive on emotional connections. You said your great-grandmother was consumed by grief when she turned to the doll. That bond may not have been broken when she died. It could have passed through your family waiting for someone else to connect with." I shook my head, frustration bubbling to the surface. I didn't connect with it. I didn't even know it existed until a few days ago. "That doesn't matter," Leah replied, her tone grim. "The doll doesn't need your permission. It just needs your attention, and by bringing it here, you've given it exactly that." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked at the doll again, its cracked face and lifeless eyes unchanged, yet the longer I stared, the more I felt it, an invisible thread tying me to it, tightening with every second. Leah pulled out her book again, flipping through pages with feverish intensity. Finally, she stopped at a section marked with a symbol, a circle encased in jagged lines. "This," she said, pointing to the symbol, "is a containment sigil. It's designed to trap entities, to sever their connection to the physical world." "How does it work?" I asked, desperate for any solution. She hesitated. "It's not foolproof, and it's dangerous. The entity won't go quietly, it'll fight back. But if we don't do something, it'll only grow stronger." I nodded, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. "Let's do it." Leah spent the next few hours preparing the ritual. She drew the sigil on the floor in chalk, surrounding it with candles and a circle of salt. The air grew thick with tension as she explained the process. "You'll need to confront it," she said. "Acknowledge its presence, but don't engage with it. Keep your focus on the sigil, and don't let it distract you." I swallowed hard, nodding. "What happens if it wins?" Leah didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. As the sun set, the ritual began. The room was bathed in flickering candlelight, the shadows dancing eerily on the walls. Leah chanted softly, her voice steady and measured. I stood at the edge of the sigil, the doll clutched in my trembling hands. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. They weren't words anymore, just an overwhelming cacophony of sound that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. My vision blurred, and the room spun as a cold, unnatural wind whipped through the air. Then it spoke. "You can't escape me." The voice was louder now, no longer a whisper, but a guttural growl that shook me to my core. The doll grew heavier in my hands, his lifeless eyes now glinting with something malevolent. I tried to keep my focus on the sigil, but the entity wasn't finished. The shadows in the room began to move, twisting into impossible shapes. One by one they took form, figures with hollow eyes and twisted faces, all staring at me. My breath hitched as I realized they weren't strangers. They were family, my great-grandmother, my grandmother, even faint outlines of relatives I'd only seen in photographs. They stood at the edge of the circle, their mouths moving soundlessly, their hollow gazes fixed on me. "They couldn't save us," the voice growled, "and neither will you." I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to focus on Leah's voice, her chants cutting through the chaos. The sigil began to glow, the lines shimmering with an otherworldly light. The doll in my hands grew hotter, the porcelain cracking further as the entity writhed within it, and then everything went silent. For a moment I thought we'd succeeded, but when I opened my eyes, the doll was gone. The silence was deafening. My hands were empty, trembling as I stared at the spot where the doll had been. Leah stopped chanting, her voice trailing into an uneasy quiet. The sigil on the floor glowed faintly for a moment longer before fading entirely, leaving only the smell of burnt wax and salt lingering in the air. "Where is it?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Leah's eyes darted around the room, her expression grim. "It's not here," she said, "but that doesn't mean it's gone." I didn't want to believe her, but the room still felt heavy, the air charged with something unseen. The whispers were gone, but the oppressive presence remained, like a shadow that refused to leave. I glanced at Leah, hoping for reassurance, but her furrowed brow only deepened my dread. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice cracking. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "The entity's connection to the doll may have been severed temporarily, but it's not destroyed. It's displaced. It could still be looking for a way back." The thought chilled me. "Back to the doll?" Leah's expression darkened. "Number to you." I staggered back, my heart pounding. "What do you mean to me?" She sighed, closing the book with a heavy thud. "You've interacted with it, carried it, listened to it. That bond can't just be erased. If the ritual wasn't strong enough, it might see you as its next vessel." The room spun, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. The idea of that thing inside me, of carrying its darkness, was too much to bear. "How do we stop it?" I asked desperately. "There has to be a way." Leah hesitated again, her fingers tracing the edges of her book. "There's a final step," she said slowly, "but it's dangerous." "More dangerous than this?" I gestured to the fading sigil, the burnt candles, the oppressive weight still hanging in the air. She nodded. "It involves severing the connection entirely, not just to you, but to this world. It's a full banishment ritual, and if it works, the entity will be forced back into the void, but if it fails..." "What?" I pressed, my patience unraveling. She met my gaze, her voice grave. If it fails, the entity will take its strongest form. It will become physical, powerful, and almost impossible to stop. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave Leah's house and never look back. But I knew that wasn't an option. The entity would follow me, torment me, and worse, it could spread its curse to others. I couldn't let that happen. "What do we need for the ritual?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Leah listed the items quickly. A mirror, a symbol of protection, and fire to destroy what was left of the connection. It sounded simple, but the way her hands shook as she explained told me otherwise. We gathered everything in silence, the tension thick enough to cut. When we were ready, Leah placed the mirror at the center of the sigil, lighting the candles again. She handed me a small blade, its handle wrapped in leather. "What's this for?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "You need to offer something," she said, a drop of blood. "It's the only way to force the entity to reveal itself." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about banishing the entity, it was about confronting it, and that meant facing the darkness head on. The ritual began, Leah's chants echoing in the dimly lit room. The air grew colder, the shadows lengthening unnaturally. I stood at the edge of the sigil, holding the blade with shaking hands. My reflection in the mirror stared back at me, distorted and wrong. As I pressed the blade to my palm, a familiar voice broke through the silence. "Why are you doing this?" It was the same childlike whisper, but now it sounded hurt, almost pleading. "You promised never to leave me." Tears blurred my vision as I fought against the pull of the voice. "You're not real," I muttered. "You're not him." The voice grew louder, more desperate. "Don't abandon me. Don't you love me?" The sigil glowed brighter, the flames of the candles flickering wildly. Leah's voice grew stronger, drowning out the whispers. I took a deep breath and let the blade slice across my palm. A single drop of blood fell onto the mirror, and the room erupted into chaos. The whispers turned into screams, the shadows writhing violently around us. The mirror cracked, its surface rippling like water, and then, from within its depths, the entity emerged. It was no longer bound to the doll, it had taken a new form. The entity rose from the mirror, a grotesque mass of shifting shadows and jagged edges. Its form defied logic, its limbs stretching and twisting in ways that no living creature could. The air around it crackled with an unnatural energy, the temperature in the room dropping sharply. Leah's chants faltered for a moment as the thing loomed over us, its presence suffocating. Its hollow eyes, two deep voids that seemed to consume the light, locked onto me. The whispers returned, louder now, layered with a chorus of voices that felt like they were crawling inside my skull. "You cannot escape me." The voice wasn't pleading anymore, it was furious. Leah grabbed my arm, pulling me back into the circle. "Stay inside the sigil," she yelled, her voice barely audible over the entity's deafening roar. "It can't cross the barrier as long as the circle is intact." But the chalk lines were already beginning to fade, the force of the entity's presence disrupting the fragile barrier. The candles flickered violently, their flames threatening to snuff out. I gripped the blade tighter, my blood dripping onto the floor as I fought to steady my breathing. "You wanted me," I said, my voice shaking but defiant. "Here I am, but you're not taking anyone else." The entity laughed, a low guttural sound that reverberated through the room. "You think you have power over me? You are nothing but a vessel, a means to an end." It reached toward me, its twisted claw-like hand stopping just short of the sigil's edge. The barrier held, but barely. The room shuddered as its shadowy form pressed against the circle, testing its strength. Leah's chants grew louder, her voice laced with desperation. The sigil's glow intensified, and the mirror began to shake violently. Cracks spidered across its surface, the reflected image of the entity warping and twisting. "You need to banish it," Leah screamed. "Focus on the mirror. It's the key." I turned my attention to the mirror, now pulsing with the same malevolent energy as the entity. My reflection stared back at me, its eyes glowing faintly with the same void-like darkness. The connection was clear. The entity wasn't just tied to the doll anymore. It had latched onto me. I raised the blade, hesitating for a moment as doubt crept in. What if destroying the mirror wasn't enough? What if it only made things worse? The entity sensed my hesitation. "Do you think this will save you?" It hissed. "Your blood has bound us. You will never be free." Its words cut deep, but I pushed the fear aside. "You don't control me," I said through gritted teeth. "Not anymore." With every ounce of strength I had, I brought the blade down onto the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, shards flying in every direction. The sigil flared brightly, the light blinding as the entity let out an ear-piercing scream. The shadows writhed violently, collapsing in on themselves as the room was consumed by the glow. The whispers turned to agonized wails, and then silence. When the light faded, the entity was gone. The mirror lay in pieces on the floor, its surface dark and lifeless. The sigil had burned away entirely, leaving only faint scorch marks on the wood. I collapsed to my knees, my entire body trembling. Leah knelt beside me, her face pale and exhausted but relieved. "It's over," she said softly. But as I looked down at my palm, where the faint outline of the runes still glowed faintly, I knew it wasn't. The entity might have been banished, but its mark remained. I left Leah's house the next morning, the doll and mirror destroyed, but the weight of what had happened lingered. I returned home, hoping to rebuild some semblance of normalcy, but every now and then, in the quiet hours of the night, I still hear the whispers. "Don't leave me.